Perhaps we've been conditioned to think that philanthropy is reserved and only something that the financially wealthy can do. But is that really the case? Because philanthropy in its truest form means the love of humanity. As I speak today, I'm going to be talking about everyone a philanthropist. How many of you saw this photo earlier this month? You know, it hit the news. It was everywhere on social media. You might have seen this curious picture of Bill Gates at that time, at least according to this morning's Forbes list. He was the world's 13th richest man. And he was having durians at Newton Circus. I hope they gave him the 𝗔𝗯𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃. And you know, contrary to social media portrayal, he was not in Singapore just to have durians or satay, right? He was here as part of the Philanthropy Asia Summit to launch the Gates Foundation office in Singapore. And what's tremendous and momentous here is that in that same week, celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Gates Foundation, he also set a new significant deadline, which is to give away virtually all of his wealth over the next 20 years. And we are talking about $200 billion. And with that, he has set a timeline to close the foundation at the end of 20 years. And you know, philanthropy is not just taking place in the West. Asian philanthropy is also evolving alongside the region's economic rise, with a huge wealth transfer happening across generations. We're seeing a rise and an interest and a surge in giving through family offices, through giving circles, and through deeper conversations about legacy and impact. At the Majurity Trust, we are a Singapore-based philanthropic organization, and it's really wonderful to be at the front row seat of seeing that philanthropy is not happening just in the West or in Asia, but it's very much happening in Singapore. We've now worked with 500 donors who have committed over $70 million in the past 70 years through us to meet underserved needs in our community. But you know, as I think about our role as a philanthropic organization, I have one recent realization and reflection, which is that perhaps we've been conditioned to think that philanthropy is reserved and only something that the financially wealthy can do. But is that really the case? That to be a philanthropist, you need to have millions in the bank, that your name be etched onto buildings, that giving is done something at a distance by people with power. Right? This belief misses something fundamental, because philanthropy in its truest form means the love of humanity. Not love just for the poor or the suffering or the marginalized, but love for humanity, for each other. And that's a love that we are all capable of. You don't need a foundation, you don't need a fund. To be a philanthropist is to live out this love in big and small ways, to show up, to care, to give of yourself, your time, and your presence. See, today, the challenges we face as a society are becoming more complex, and all of you are on the front lines seeing that complexity. Mental health, aging, intergenerational tensions, loneliness, burnout. You know, these are not policy problems. These are deeply human issues. And it was wonderful to hear Prof. Eugene shared earlier about some of the statistics. 15,000 seniors living alone, 5,000 over of them on financial assistance. And what Prof. Eugene shared really struck a chord with me. He said, these are not statistics. They are our neighbors. And I think that is something that we should think about. Right? And while social services and professionals are vital, it may not fully address the complexity of the needs we see and we experience. Because the community itself can be a solution, but often we may miss that. And now more than ever, we need to invest in social cohesion, to rebuild trust between neighbors, to believe again that we belong. Because caring and giving is not just generous, it's healing. We know from research that strong social connections and a sense of belonging are powerful determinants of well-being. And 𝗪𝗪 also shared her perspective from design and health that the environment makes the world of difference for our community members. And when neighbors look out for one another, feel a shared sense of responsibility, we experience lower rates of loneliness, anxiety, and depression. Acts of neighborliness, even small ones, can boost mental health by creating trust, emotional safety, and mutual support. I think many of you will agree with me that in this increasingly fragmented world, rebuilding these local bonds isn't just good for society, it's essential for individual and collective well-being. So, to push this idea and work towards turning concept into practice, we've planted ourselves in Chongpang to be a conduit for giving, taking all we know as a philanthropy organization, working with people with resources and working with people who are at the front line of solving community issues. I want to say very clearly that our role is not to replace existing service providers, but to be a philanthropic enabler. It's been wonderful to partner closely with the Yishun Family Service Center team. I can see Sing Wei somewhere and the team over there. To discover the needs on the ground, we start by understanding what's strong and not what is wrong, and to create platforms for neighbors to bring their skills and assets to address those needs. We're also working with a really innovative and grounded social enterprise called 𝗖𝗍𝗂𝘁𝗂𝘁 to develop a community trail that is guided by Chongpang locals and curated in a way that speaks of the resilience and the strength of the community to live in. And we're launching that trail in June. We'd love to send an open invite to everyone to join us. And also with the support of 𝗖𝗍𝗂𝘁𝗂𝘁, we have also rolled out a community fund to support resident-led projects from the ground up. To enable all of this, we invested in a full-time community developer. So my colleague, Ming Fang, if you could stand, who was previously a social worker, she very bravely took on this role, and to be quite frank, we are still learning and seeing what does this mean for philanthropic organization to be planted and to be very close to community, because often philanthropy is accused of being in the ivory tower, again, people with power sitting very far away trying to do good. But can we hear from the residents, be close to the ground, and really understand what are the needs that needs to be solved? So her role is to connect these dots on the ground with resources, and this is an unusual move for philanthropy organization, but an active one we are taking to walk the talk. Let me share with you a story of Madam 𝗖𝗍𝗻, one of the residents of Chongpang that we've been partnering with. In 2014, she started Project Pencil to provide stationery and learning materials to children living in orphanages overseas. She did this after a friend asked her for help. And what began as a simple act of giving gradually grew in purpose and in reach. During the COVID-19 pandemic, a turning point came when a neighbor living close to her, who was a wheelchair user living alone, was found to have passed on in his flat, only discovered after a stench was detected. Moved by this tragedy, she and a group of neighbors in Yishun banded together to look out for one another. And that spirit of care has evolved now into Project Pencil Singapore, a grown-up initiative that runs free academic mentoring programs and 𝗓𝗏 classes for children from lower resource families. They also organize a distribution of unsold fruits, vegetables, second-hand clothing, and appliances to residents in need. She said this, and when we were speaking to her, she said, "Some of my neighbors have my telephone number, and my hotline is open 24 hours. I tell the elderly who live alone to call me if they need help." And isn't that just a powerful story of what a single resident can do to create that thriving community of care and concern across? Her story is not one-off. People like Madam 𝗖𝗍𝗻𝗁 already exist in our communities, as we have heard earlier as well, and many of you see in the work you do. But yet, too often, they do this work quietly with little resources of recognition, which is why our role in Majurity is to come alongside them, not just with funding, but bridging resources, enabling connections, and building capabilities. That's how we hope we can build thriving communities, not by starting new things for the community, but strengthening what is already there. I want to close with a reflection Madam 𝗖𝗍𝗻𝗁 shared in a recent Straits Times interview that deeply resonated with me. She said this: "What the world needs now is love. Life is not just about ourselves and our families, but also others." So like Madam Sarima, let's learn to love and to give. Let's build a Singapore where everyone sees themselves as a friend, a neighbor, a giver, and a philanthropist. Thank you.